In the world of strength and conditioning, one of the most debated terms is that of sport specificity. The intention is simple. How can we structure our training so that it has the highest transferability to our sport? So with this definition in mind, let me tell you my viewpoint on the topic and what I consider to be productive and unproductive. An athlete that has taken the concept of specificity too far may decide to attach weight plates to every muscle group in the body and start practicing wrestling maneuvers, for example, in an attempt to develop strength and wrestling coordination simultaneously. Or let's say you're a basketball player trying to dribble a heavier ball, or a tennis player using a heavier racket, and things of this nature. I like to refer to this as hysterical specificity. Now, hysterical sport specificity does nothing more than a poor job in either factor, that is, sport specificity and strength and power. Neither of these get a specialized emphasis, because they will be approached in a very scattered kind of Swiss Army knife approach where none of them gets hyper-focused. And the proposed focus that you will have in terms of sports coordination, they will be so far off what the sport actually resembles that you could be better off doing the sport itself. The progressive overload will be limited, and the impracticality and the difficulty of the execution will far outweigh its proposed sport specificity. So what is the alternative viewpoint to this topic? Let's take three athletes that are polar opposites in terms of athletic demands: a javelin thrower, a 10K runner, and a wrestler. The javelin thrower is training for maximal force into one small moment in a matter of seconds, explosive power that is. And the supplemental attributes will be strength, maximal force production, and endurance, that is stamina, whether aerobic or anaerobic, will pretty much be non-existent, the bottom of that list. As for our 10K runner, they are training for an endurance-based sport that is almost entirely of aerobic nature, of aerobic endurance that is. And then for our wrestler, they are training for sort of a hybrid sport that demands all of the attributes almost equally: aerobic endurance, anaerobic endurance, strength and explosive power training. It is very hard to pinpoint which one is more important. Now here is the fascinating part. When it comes to the strength and power training for all of these athletes, they will all pretty much do the same thing. They will all include some kind of a squat variation, maybe a deadlift variation, a bench press, pull-ups, rowing variations, regardless of whether we're talking about the runner or the wrestler. And when they are training for explosive power, they will all pretty much do sprinting, maybe ballistic training, maybe medicine ball throws or Olympic weightlifting, whatever the case might be. These are all time-tested, rigorously researched methods that has been implemented with success since the Soviet Union. So what exactly will be different for all of these athletes? Where does the sport specificity come into the equation? And the truth is that the exercise selection and the execution of these will not be as different as you might think between these sports. What will be different is the integration. Knowing that all of these athletes will require strength, explosive power, and endurance to different degrees and spectrums, the differentiating factors will be how these components are organized and prioritized in line with the different seasons. That is the off-season, the pre-season, and the in-season. In other words, if you're a javelin thrower 1 week from competition, an event that basically is about a throw that lasts for 1 or 2 seconds, putting all of your energy, your passion, your acclimation of all of your past traumas and future goals and self-view into one small moment, of course you shouldn't be messing around with a bunch of 5K or 10K runs prior to this. You should be training as close as possible to the demands of javelin throwing itself. If you are a 10K runner 1 week away from competition, of course you shouldn't be performing 1 repetition maximums in the squats and power cleans and things of this nature. In fact, you will probably never do 1 repetition maximums as a 10K runner, because the strength training you do will be astronomically different from, let's say, a javelin thrower or a shot putter. Both you and the javelin thrower will implement the same basic movement patterns, such as squatting, such as pulling, such as pushing and things of this nature. But the javelin thrower is after maximal strength development exclusively, condensing all energy into one moment, while you as a 10K runner, you're using strength training for predominantly stability development, running economy, movement efficiency, and injury prevention and things of this nature. So it's not necessarily the exercises that will be different between these athletes, but the prescription of reps and sets and intensity and load management mainly. So some form of basic strength training can be beneficial for a 10K runner, but it has to be at the appropriate time. And this comes down to periodization. Periodization is about taking a grand objective and dividing it into smaller, manageable goals. In the case of our 10K runner, for example, we know that strength training and explosive power training and plyometrics and Olympic lifts, they are not as big of a demand to the sport as aerobic endurance, but they still contribute to endurance in subtle ways. So the best thing would do to train that in the off-season that are far away from competition so that we can entertain those, and then as we get closer to the in-season, we start performing training more similar to the sport itself, that is the energetic demands. So strength and power for our 10K runner, it is a need, but not an immediate need as much as aerobic endurance is. Now these characterizations that you see here, they are simplifications to prove a point, because we don't need to bog ourselves down completely. We can divide them further into max strength or high velocity strength, maximum velocity, anaerobic endurance and all of that stuff, and these can be further divided into smaller subcategories. We can pretty much go on like this forever. Instead now, having our 3 athletes, let's choose the most important categories that we need to emphasize. Number 1, we have our javelin thrower. They might do maximal strength with volume in one period in the off season. Then as we get closer, they do max strength with higher intensity and lower rep ranges, for example. And then as we get closer, the closest to the competition that is, we do explosive power. And for our 10K runner and our wrestler, the situation will look very different. Now, here is the crucial factor. Just because we are emphasizing one attribute in one period, it does not mean that we exclude everything else. Everything needs to be entertained at all times. It's the proportion that matters. For example, our javelin thrower that is performing max strength in the off-season, they will also perform speed training and things of this nature, but to a lesser extent. It is the priority and the proportion that is different. And once again, periodization, it simply means planning, whether it's the next year or the next 10 years. It is about making a mental roadmap so that you know what you are training for and so that you can structure things up. And contrary to popular belief, periodization does not mean predicting. You're not gonna know what kind of rep range or weight you're gonna do 1 year from now, because that would be prophecy. You can have some degree of control what you might be able to realistically achieve 1 week from now, but 1 year, forget about it. That is not the premise of periodization. Periodization is just having a rough outline, and you might have to change things as you proceed, and you will probably have to do that. So as a summary, if you want to train specific to your sport, instead of trying to invent exact movement patterns in the gym that resemble the most to your sport, just stick to the fundamentals, assess the demands of your sport and your biggest needs, and divide all attributes and start prioritizing them in line with the seasons of your sport. That's it.